Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Hope you're having good time with your family and friends and liking these sessions. In today's video on Azure, I'm here to discuss what Azure Carbon Optimization is and how it can help your organization achieve sustainability. So let's get started. Before we proceed, if you're getting value from these sessions, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this content. So let's start with a typical scenario. Now, when we go and deploy resources in any Azure region, there is a carbon footprint attached to that. What does that mean is that in order to run these resources, there is greenhouse gas emission which is happening, which is typically carbon dioxide. And that's where Azure Carbon Optimization will come into play because this service will help you to identify and see how much is the emission which is happening through your resources. It will help you to make recommendation. And as a company, you can do your part to build a sustainable future. Because as you know, a lot of governments, they're investing a lot in order to have a lot of green initiative. And as a service provider, you should be doing your part in order to achieve that. And what is the benefit for you in this? I'm going to explain that too in a moment. Obviously, there is a benefit of reducing the carbon footprint, so that's good for everybody. But there's some more benefits I'm going to explain you in a moment. So Azure Carbon Optimization is one of the services which allows you to do that. Now, in order to utilize this, you need to have a role-based access control, obviously, so that you can see or view the emission. Then you can also have a look at the recommendation which is being made. And then you can also, let's say, edit configuration. And they're typically, I will say, based on your job requirement, you can be owner, contributor, or there is a specific role called carbon optimization reader. Now, if you're owner, obviously, you can do all these three things. Same thing for the contributor too. If you are a carbon optimization reader, you can only view the emission. You cannot see the recommendation and you cannot obviously edit the configuration. But you need to have specific roles in order to see this in your Azure portal. Now, from the cost perspective, it needs to be determined because this service is in preview right now. So under the previous state, there is no cost associated. So you can go and obviously check that out, which I'm going to show you on the Azure portal. But for now, there is no cost associated. You can apply filters at the resource group level, location, and you can see based on that, obviously, based on the service, and you can see where that uh, carbon emission is coming from. Now, when you look at the time span, you can go all the way up to 12 months back and see how you have been performing from the emission perspective in the last 12 months. Now, for example, I'm in right now November of 2024. I will see this month's emission on the 19th of next month. So it will be 19th of December in my case because in November, so it's 1 month delay. But you can see your carbon footprint for the last 12 months, and based on that, obviously, it will have recommendation. Now, other thing is that this service, which is carbon optimization, integrates with Azure Advisor. And if you have utilized Azure Advisor, actually, I have a full detailed video on this. I'll leave the link in the description of this video. It is based on the five pillars. It's also a free service, and it's going to analyze your environment based on cost, performance, operational excellence, reliability, all these factors, and then it will make recommendation. And when it comes to integration with the carbon optimization service, it will make recommendations so that you can right size the machine. If the machine is not being utilized, you want to allocate that. And all these things are interrelated when it comes to reducing the greenhouse effect emission, as well as obviously reducing the cost. But this service, which is integrates with Azure Advisor. All right. So this is what it's in nutshell. And in if you look at into the Azure portfolio, there are some other services that you might also come across. For example, you have Microsoft Sustainability Manager. There's also Microsoft Emission Insight. Also, Emission Impact Dashboard. All these services, including Azure Carbon Optimization, do specific jobs, but these are the services in the Azure portfolio that you have that gives you some sort of information about how your resources are performing with respect to carbon emission and what kind of carbon footprint you're having based on those resources in the specific region. Now, another important component to this is the scope, right? And it can be categorized into three categories: scope 1, 2, and 3. And if you can see, scope 1 is direct greenhouse gas emission from on site fuel combustion, for example, generator vehicle fleet. Scope 2 is indirect greenhouse gas emissions, such as emission from electricity provider. And scope 3 are other indirect greenhouse gas emission from the value supply chain. And we'll discuss this more in a detail. But let me show you quickly on the Azure portal how this will look like. Now I have the owner access for this subscription. So let me just go and show you that. So I'm the owner. Now, if you want, you can also have different role assignments, right? You can add and remove roles. For example, I also talked about contributor. There is also a specific role for carbon optimization reader. This will allow you to see the emission, but you can specify the role based on the job description. But let me just go and search for this service, which is carbon optimization. And you can see in this dashboard, I get a view of my total carbon emission. I can see carbon emission for the last 1 month. And it also divides me for the last 12 months how much carbon emission is happening. And I can see the trends also. It also gives me emission equivalent, right? So the kind of emission it's happening through my resources is equivalent to around 2100 smartphone getting charged or 2 gallons of gasoline which is getting consumed. So this is a great way of at least putting a number against based on my resources that I'm running, what kind of carbon footprint I have, right? You can see all the reduction opportunities too. Now, in my case, I don't have any because this is not a production grade environment, so you don't see much activity over here. But as I mentioned, that this integrates with Azure Advisor. It will also make recommendation of right sizing and all that stuff so that you can reduce the carbon footprint. You also have information based on specific service like storage, virtual network, virtual machine, where most of your emission is coming from. And you can also drill down into based on the specific region. Now, my resources are deployed under two, which is Canada Central and East US. You can see the majority of this emission is coming from Canada Central. And you can see the carbon intensity, how that is happening across board, right? You also then have the emission detail, some more information. You can go and drill down based on the resource group, right? How much it is happening, COTE. CO2e stands for carbon dioxide emission, and this is in grams. You can also have this in kg. That's how this is metered. And then obviously emission reduction. What are the options? You don't see much because, as I mentioned, this is a test and dev kind of environment. But you can see that these are some of the options available through this service so that I can keep a track of my greenhouse gas emissions and what I can do in order to reduce this. Now, another component to this is scope 1, 2, and 3. And if you can see, let me just remove them. And you can see most of my emission is coming from scope 3, right? And almost 100%, I will say. And the scope 1 is zero point 0.1, and for the scope 2 is almost nothing. So majority of my emission is coming from scope 3. So let's discuss this a little bit. Let me go to my whiteboard. So as I mentioned, when we talk about scope 3, these are the indirect activities. So one of the example I can give you of scope 3 is supply chain emission. Now, this can be you can give example of, let's say, manufacturing of server, whatever greenhouse gases were emitted, that can be categorized under that. Then maybe data center construction can be another example of this, along with the obviously transportation of these components in order to manufacture the servers as well as for the data center construction. Another example can be operational emission. Under this, now if you look at, while direct emission from running these resources, so in my case majority they are storage account as well as virtual machine, and whatever electric usage, that falls into the scope 2. Now indirect emission, if you look at, associated with the entire life cycle of these resources, like cooling, maybe maintenance, and eventual disposal of waste, will fall under the operational emission, right? And then another example can be end user emission. Now you will think, right, how the end user emission will come into play. Now, any of these resources that I'm running, like storage, VM, now this is providing some sort of service to my end customer, right? So some sort of storage is being provided to my customer. So whatever emission which is getting generated by their use of these services will fall under scope 3. For example, if you look at, if the application requires significant data processing on the client side, the energy is consumed by these end user devices, that still fall under the scope 3 of carbon emissions category that we are talking about here, right? Now, what are the strategies, actually, if you look at, what are the strategies we can apply in order to reduce or optimize emission of these greenhouse gases? One example I can see is to optimize resources. We want to make sure that I'm utilizing the right size of the virtual machine. Let's say right tier of the storage so that it reduces the carbon footprint. If I'm saying that I'm utilizing only 30% of CPU consumption of my compute that I have deployed, and I'm utilizing high series of machine, I want to maybe bring it down in terms of the compute power. Now that's directly related to the carbon footprint. And from the organizational point of view, it's also saving you money because you're not deploying or you're doing optimal deployment of your resources based on the requirement. So it's to a dual serve or serve dual purpose. You're doing your part for the organization and also reducing the cost for the organization too. Now, another thing is maybe you can think of green software practice. Now, you might think what green software practice is. Now, obviously, as a IT admin, as a developer, you want to deploy application, and you want to deploy these application with energy efficiency in mind. Now, what this can include? Now, this can include, if I can say, optimization of your code to reduce the computational load, which in turn will reduce the energy consumption on both for your VMs as well as on the end user device. That's what green software practice will come into play. And maybe also sustainable procurement. Maybe you want to choose Azure region that prioritize maybe renewable energy and have lower carbon footprint. But these are some of the strategies you can utilize in order to optimize your carbon emission. And as I mentioned, this will also help your organization to reduce the cost, and maybe uh, some incentives will be available for you from certain government or certain organization if you have implemented these practices in place in your IT infrastructure. So this is what Azure carbon optimization is in a nutshell. Hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.